For the last 20 years, anime and manga have taken the world by storm. Almost everyone, especially in East Asia and the West, has heard or seen it. It's become a multi-billion-dollar industry with millions of passionate and sometimes obsessive fans worldwide. But while it's brought light to joy to many, behind the scenes, things have always been a little bit darker. Whether it's manga artists working themselves into an early grave by slaving away day and night to meet extremely tight deadlines and harsh fan expectations, or whether it's those working in the anime industry who labor in harsh working conditions for notoriously low wages. But there was one studio, a light amongst the vast darkness, a golden city upon a hill. This studio was known as Kyoto Animation. Founded in 1981 by Hideaki Hatta, it was known for its quality over quantity philosophy. Hatta strived to ensure that his workers were treated well, were free to create, and were allowed to have proper work-life balance, something unheard of in the anime industry. A dream for those who had the privilege to work there. But like all dreams, we must wake up and embrace the cruel world around us. The workers at Kyoto Animation would wake up on July 18, 2019, ready for just another day, a day to do a job that they loved. But of the 70 workers that would enter Studio 1, one of the main Kyoto Animation studios, 36 of them wouldn't walk out, and another 34 would be scarred for the rest of their lives. This attack, the worst act of mass murder in Japan since the Second World War, was carried out by one troubled man named Shinji Aoba. In this video, I'm going to discuss the worst and most horrifying disaster to ever happen in the anime industry. I'm going to discuss the Kyoto Animation arson attack of 2019. Before we get into the meat of this video, I would love if you guys could like, subscribe, and comment below, and let me know what you guys think about this video and what you might like to see next. Thank you for watching. In 2019, Japanese anime was a booming industry valued at $2 billion, and one of the cornerstones of this industry was Kyoto Animation. About 40 years earlier in 1981, Hatta and his wife Yoko saw the potential of the then young and burgeoning industry, and then would go on to establish their own animation studio in Kyoto, the cultural capital of Japan. But Hatta and Yoko didn't want their studio to be like the others, who would overwork their employees, pay them low wages, to quickly and profitably churn out show after show. No, instead Hatta prioritized the quality of his work, and most importantly of his employees. Even though anime usually has a reputation for being upbeat and hopeful, the situation behind the scenes was usually anything but. Studios were known for their long hours, exploitive working conditions, and lack of job security. Many anime studios would be dubbed black corporations, as they usually operated outside of the law and paid little heed to Japanese labor laws. But Hatta wanted to do something else. He wanted to change the status quo. From the very beginning, Hatta allowed working mothers to work from home, instituted a 9-hour workday, and encouraged a collaborative work environment in which communication amongst workers was emphasized. All of this was alien to the rest of the industry. But despite the unorthodox work practices, Kyoto Animation would go on to produce famous anime such as Violent Evergarden, Lucky Star Free, and A Silent Voice, just to name a few. These productions would go well with the critics and fans alike. Everything seemed to be going well. The employees loved their jobs and the fans and critics loved what they did. But not everyone was happy. Throughout the years of 2018 and 2019, Kyoto Animation would receive over 200 death threats. Hatta would inform the police and some officers would be assigned to patrol the local area, but nothing came of it, and eventually the police turned their attention someplace else. In October of 2018, Kyoto was bombarded with emails containing death threats, in which certain employees were being targeted by name. But there was something off about them. These emails all sounded the same, as if they had been written by the same person. It seems that someone was really upset at Kyoto Animation for plagiarizing their works. Hatta didn't know it at the time, but after the attack it would become quite apparent. These emails were written by Shinji Aoba. Shinji had previously entered a fan contest that was run by Kyoto Animation, in which the fans could submit their work, and if they won, it might actually be made into a full production. Shinji had always wanted to be a writer, to create his own stories, but he didn't win the contest, though he would believe that his works had been plagiarized by the studio, and that the studio was actually getting successful off of his work without him getting any credit or fame for it. And this was something that he wasn't going to let slide. Shinji, then 41 years old, lived 283 miles away from Kyoto in the Tokyo suburb known as Saitama. The Japanese people have a reputation for conformity and politeness. Japan is known for its orderly and low-crime society, but Shinji didn't fit this mold. He was much different, for he represented a darker and troubled element of Japanese society, one that arises when people are cast to the dark and cold fringes of society, only to come back in a blaze of terror, hoping to finally feel some warmth. Shinji tended to find himself in trouble. Once he was caught stealing female undergarments from a clothesline and received a suspended sentence. A little time later, he would rob a convenience store and spend 3.5 years in jail. For a society such as Japan, such behavior is guaranteed ostracization, and for someone as antisocial and resentful as Shinji, it guaranteed destruction. On July 14th, 4 days before the incident, Shinji was living alone in apartment 104 in the Tokyo suburb of Saitama, about 283 miles away from Studio 1. Next door lived Matsumoto, a local quality control officer at an electronics store. It was a long summer weekend, and Matsumoto was trying to enjoy the best that he could, the little precious time that a Japanese worker hoped for in a work culture known for its excruciating hours. But on that Sunday, it was quiet, a little bit too quiet, not something that neighbors of Shinji could enjoy for long. Beginning right in the morning, Matsumoto would begin to hear a loud banging coming from Shinji's apartment. Eventually, another neighbor had had enough and began to bang on Shinji's wall, demanding that he shut up and stop the racket, and stop it would, but never for long. This was a pattern that Matsumoto had gotten used to. Shinji had cared little for his neighbors. He would blast loud music in the middle of the day and sometimes even late at night. The neighbors would complain and sometimes even the police were called. In response, Shinji would quiet down for a week or two and then return to his old behaviors. But what was strange was that the music that Shinji played could hardly be considered such a thing. Matsumoto recounted how the music sounded like a metallic drone, how you didn't know where one song began and the other ended. It was just strange sounds that made very little sense. Shinji's hygiene was just as terrible as his taste in music. He was ungroomed, rarely washed his clothes, and it was overall messy. You could usually tell that Shinji was nearby by the stench that emanated from him. Inconsiderate, unstable, and messy would be the best ways to describe such a man. Regardless, later that very Sunday, Shinji would leave his apartment and begin to bang on Matsumoto's door. When he received no response, he returned to his apartment. Matsumoto eventually went outside and knocked on Shinji's door. He would tell Shinji that he wasn't the one banging on his wall, and that instead it was another neighbor. Immediately after, Shinji began to throw objects at the wall between him and Matsumoto's apartment. They would then confront one another in the hallway, where Shinji grabbed Matsumoto by his collar and threatened to kill him, telling him that he had nothing to lose. Matsumoto recounted how his eyes looked insane, as if the humanity from Shinji was gone. This was 4 days before the incident, and Shinji had already lost it. And it would be right after this day on a Monday, July 15th, that Shinji would board a bullet train and head straight to Kyoto. He would never come back to this apartment, and Matsumoto would never see Shinji ever again, for he was going to Kyoto to carry out his dark intentions, something that he could never come back from. These tantrums that he was throwing were a sign that Shinji had been pushed over the edge. He was angry and resentful at the world for the isolation and shame that they had placed on him, and the fact that his desire to become a writer went unfulfilled. It was now time for Shinji himself to strike against those that he had believed had wronged him. Once in Kyoto, later that morning, Shinji checked into a downtown hotel. He would spend the night there. On the next morning, he headed towards the Kyoto Animation studio. It can be assumed that he was scouting out his target. CCTV footage would reveal him visiting a local internet cafe, but not much else. 2 days later, on Wednesday, July 17th, Shinji would make his first real move towards fulfilling his plan. He would walk into a local hardware store and purchase a metal trolley. He would take it down to the Enos gas station and purchase 10 gallons of gasoline, which he loaded into 2 red plastic containers. Loading them onto his trolley, he pushed them towards Studio One and eventually reached a local park, where he decided to spend the night with his trolley and gasoline containers next to him. That night, he slept with the tools of terror that would cause the death of dozens in a fiery blast. Did Shinji sleep well that night? Did he ever question what he was about to do? Perhaps, but it doesn't matter, because Shinji would wake up the next morning and head into Studio One, just like the 70 employees of Kyoto Animation. The front door was unlocked. Kyoto Animation was expecting executives from the television network to visit that day and didn't want them waiting outside, but instead, they would only be visited by Death himself. At 10:30 a.m., the inconsiderate, unstable, and messy Shinji would push his trolley through the front door. Shinji would then proceed to wash the ground with gasoline, flick his lighter, and light the fire, yelling "die" while he did it. Unfortunately for Shinji, some of the gasoline had gotten on him as well. No one in that building, not even Shinji, would be spared the fire's wrath. There was an explosion, but what is frightening is the speed at which the fire would spread. Immediately, 2 Kyoto Animation employees were set on fire. Within just 10 seconds, the entire lobby was on fire with temperatures reading 950 degrees Fahrenheit. In the next 20 seconds, the second floor was fully ablaze. Within another 20 seconds, the third floor was ablaze as well. And within just 1 short minute, the entire building was filled with fire and smoke. Employees within the building never had a proper chance to react. Most would never even know that Shinji had started the fire. By the time the employees saw the smoke, the front entrance was already blocked, and there weren't many other proper ways out of the building. Many on the first floor managed to escape by the windows, but only if they had acted immediately. Employees on the second floor also jumped from the windows, and some broke their limbs as they landed on the ground, while others would walk over broken glass and leave bloody footprints behind them. About 19 employees decided to make a run for the roof, going up the spiral staircase. They would make a right towards the door, but no further. Was the door to the roof locked? No. Instead, the spiral shape of the staircase had made it into a powerful chimney that funneled the air, filled it with smoke, and created an inferno. The door at the top of the staircase was unlocked, but the 19 employees who tried to find refuge on the roof were all found dead, cuddled together near the top of the stairs. Less than a minute is what it took for the entire building to go up. Less than 1 minute decided the fate of everyone inside. it would take 5 hours to bring the fire under control. While all this horror was unfolding inside, outside Shinji was suffering from the burns of his own. After fleeing outside, Shinji would collapse on the ground covered in burns. A woman nearby started to spray him with water from a hose to help. Shinji would eventually get up and continue his escape, but he wouldn't get far, because behind him there were 2 Kyoto Animation employees who had managed to escape through the front entrance. They chased after Shinji and eventually managed to pin him to the ground until the police arrived to arrest him. Shinji's great escape was over. While pinned to the ground, Shinji would yell that Kyoto Animation had plagiarized his work, that he wanted to speak with the president of their company, but the president wasn't there yet. He would arrive later to see the horror that had unfolded in his absence. After 5 hours, the fire had settled, and the paramedics and firefighters could begin searching the building. There would be no survivors, and only those that escaped in the first minutes lived to tell the tale. Well, most of them. 2 people were killed immediately on the first floor, with another 11 on the second, and another 19 would be found bunched together at the top of the spiral staircase, right before the door that led to the roof. They had either burned or suffocated to death from the smoke, which was funneling through the staircase. In total, about 34 people died initially. Another 2 would die later of their injuries, bringing the total death toll to 36. Among the dead were industry veterans such as Yashiro Takamoto, Yoshi Kagami, Futoshi Nishiya, and many others such as Naomi Ishida. One of the victims was a young new animator who had also volunteered as a local firefighter. When the president of the company, Hatta, arrived at the scene, he was in complete shock. He spent the whole day consoling the victims and trying to take in the chaos. Hatta tried to leave and make his way out, but he was hounded by journalists no matter where he turned. Driving home with his wife Yoko, they saw their house surrounded by TV trucks and journalists. Hatta decided to instead drop his wife off at their daughter's house nearby. He would then spend the portion of the night just driving around aimlessly. There was no making sense of this tragedy, and he didn't know where to go. He would then pull into an empty parking lot and sit and wonder. Eventually his son managed to track him down and joined him. Neither Hatta nor his son would sleep that night. By this time, the news of the attack had spread across Japan and the world. Thousands of fans descended upon the site to offer their condolences and leave flowers. Major animation studios around Japan and the world offered their support, and millions were raised through charity. Eventually, the Japanese government would even pass a law that allowed all donations related to Kyoto Animation to be tax-free. But it wasn't just industry colleagues and fans that were coming, it was also the families and friends of the victims, hoping their loved ones were among the survivors. Identifying all the bodies and giving closure would be difficult. Some bodies were burned beyond recognition, and the DNA testing was necessary to identify them. In the end, this attack was the biggest act of mass murder since the end of the Second World War, and Japan, a country known for its low crime rate, would be shaken. To give you an idea, in 2019, Japan had 0.2 murders per 100,000 people, while the United States had 5.3 per 100,000 people. This act would go against trends expected for Japan, which had actually been experiencing a declining crime rate. A few months later in October, Shinji had regained consciousness in the hospital where he was being treated until he could be returned to police custody. Shinji's attitude at this point has changed. He was now thankful for everyone around him, especially the nurses and the doctors. Shinji during this time would admit that he targeted the studio, but felt that things may have gone off the road. Shinji himself suffered life-threatening injuries on 90% of his body. To help the victims heal, skin transplants had to be done. Since donated skin was in short supply, the victims were prioritized, while Shinji would receive solely synthetic skin, the procedure that was the first of its kind. Back at Studio One, a few weeks after the fire, Hatta and some of his employees would have the chance to enter the building. Inside, the fire had destroyed most of the equipment and the paperwork that was unsecured and outside. This included about half of the studio's work on paper. But there was some light at the end of the tunnel. The main server itself was safe. It was located at the back corner of the building behind a fireproof door. This would mean that even though some of the employees had passed, their work would live on in their memory. To this day, Hatta himself is still torn on whether the studio should be rebuilt. Many of the staff expressed worry about the thought of working at the site where so many of their colleagues passed. In the wider society, some people try to tie this attack to anime itself. Even though anime and manga were growing, many people still viewed its fans as being somewhat weird and not part of normal society. There had also been cases where murders and crimes had been committed by people that were obsessed with anime or manga, or even claimed that it had been their inspiration to commit the crime. In 1989, a murder known as Tsutomu Miyazaki had killed 4 girls. Authorities would eventually find a large stash of anime videotapes in his house, and the media started to call him the otaku killer. Otaku means a hardcore anime or manga fan. In 2003, Haruki Toshida beat his mother to death after Neon Genesis Evangelion had convinced him that humans were not important. Of course, in all of these situations, the murderers were disturbed, had a litany of other issues besides their anime and manga consumption. What gets me is that dozens of studios are horrifying to work at. Black corporations that don't follow even Japanese Japanese labor laws, overwork and underpay their workers, and threaten to ruin their employees' careers if they try to quit. But Kyoto Animation was one of the good ones, one that was led by genuinely good people who wanted to treat their employees like family and give them excellent working conditions, especially by Japanese standards. But for some reason, this is the studio that was struck by this tragedy. I suppose that evil always pursues the good and pure. Conclusion. On January 30th, 2024, Shinji would be sentenced to death for the murder of 36 Kyoto Animation employees. The judge, Kazuke Masuda, would have mentioned that Shinji was an inspiring novelist but was unsuccessful. Due to his failure, Shinji would become resentful and, combined with his antisocial tendencies, decided to lash out at the world. He also believed that Kyoto Animation had stolen ideas from the novels that he submitted in a contest to them. As of this recording, Shinji is still waiting on death row. It is customary in Japan that the condemned are only told the date of their execution mere moments before it happens, usually in the morning of. Again, this was the deadliest act of mass murder since the Second World War, one of the biggest tragedies to hit the anime community and the wider world at large. The fact that it happened to one of the actually well-managed studios makes it even sadder, though an attack on any studio would have been just as devastating. To this day, Kyoto Animation is still running. Hatta has even decided to postpone his retirement to continue helping the company and honoring those that passed. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The most horrifying tragedy to strike the anime industry in Japan since the Second World War. Every day could be our last, so make sure to cherish every moment of it and never waste a second of your life. If you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you could subscribe, like, and comment below, and let me know what you think. See you guys later.